Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. My name's Ryan. Today we're going to be doing a triple feature, 3 bottles that are new this year that I really wanted to dive into. A couple of them are actually, what would we call these? I don't want to call them like community whiskeys, but it's whiskeys that were kind of made by whiskey community people. We've got one that's from the Bourbon Junkies. We've got one that's from Take, who runs r/bourbon over on Reddit. And then we have them going head-to-head with a legacy distiller in the form of New Riff. And we're going to dive into these today and see where they stack up in the grand scheme of things, because we've had a lot of great whiskeys this year. So I'm interested to see how they kind of go toe-to-toe with some of these heavy hitters out there, and maybe if they deserve a spot in our best of the year sort of category. So let's get into them one at a time. We'll kick things off with Take's bottle. This is the Barrell Infinite number 3. You guys ready for these stats? Okay, so Barrell Infinite is an r/bourbon thing. What they've been doing is they're partnering with Take to come up with a blend, and it's some pretty impressive age statements on these, okay? So the price tag on this bottle, by the way, you would look at the blend, you would think it would be more than it is. It's not cheap, but the bottle comes in at 130 bucks, okay? It's 126.32 proof, so it's got some heat to it. But the youngest whiskey in here is 17 years old. I don't want to get these wrong, so I'm just going to read them off to you. You guys ready for this? This is what's in the blend. We have a 17-year-old Tennessee bourbon. We have Tennessee whiskey. We have a 17-year-old Indiana bourbon. We have a 17-year-old Canadian rye, a 17-year-old Canadian whiskey, a 20-year-old Kentucky straight bourbon, a 22-year-old Scotch, and a 24-year-old Canadian whiskey. And then, finished in ice wine casks. Ice wine is pretty popular here in Michigan, so I'm very interested in this. You look at it on paper and you're like, this is the equivalent of when we were kids and our parents would take us out to a fast food restaurant and they'd tell you to go get your own drink, and we'd take our cup and we'd go down the soda machine and go psh, 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 psh. You know, we called it a suicide is what we would call it, but we'd just get every single soda in the same glass, and we lied to ourselves and said that it was good, and then we grew up and we're like, yo, that sucks. And then we don't do it anymore. But that's like what this looks like on paper. It's like, okay, what didn't you put in here? Because that'd be a shorter list. But I can only imagine what this looked like when they were sitting down at the blending table and they had hundreds of samples out, all labeled from what barrels they came from, the ages, the locations, all that stuff. And they mixed and matched until they came up with this concoction. And then decided, you know what it needs? Put it in an ice wine cask. I gotta tell you, on the nose, that ice wine cask is the first thing I get, okay? Sweet honey and bright green apple on the nose. I mean, it is very, very sweet on the nose. I don't really get much of any, if any at all, like bourbon notes on the nose. But I do get a lot of that sort of Canadian, mellowed rye kind of a vibe on the nose for sure, those yellow fruits. If I didn't know it was a blend and you just told me to guess what it was, I would probably guess that it was an old Canadian whiskey of some kind on the nose. But very fruity, very sweet. Let's try it. Cheers. You know, it's crazy. The very first thing I get is kind of like this, like, you ever have oatmeal scotchies, like oatmeal cookies with butterscotch in them? That's the kind of sweetness I get up front. I don't get the fruit up front. But then there's this wave of seasoned oak, not like bitey and spicy, but a little tannic, slightly bitter, big wave of oak. And then when you come down the backside of the wave, we come crashing down into this like grape candy, this artificial grape flavor that you get on like a grape dum-dum sucker, something like that, or a grape airhead. Man, that's kind of a wild sip. As it just sits there, after a while, well after I've had the sip and swallowed, it ends up kind of mellowing out to this like melon and a little bit of smooth caramel, like real buttery caramel. You definitely can't accuse it of being too simple. I mean, it's a fairly complex sip. Maybe one of the more complex sips I've had in a while. Yeah, that big wave of just slightly peppery seasoned oak right there smack dab in the middle. But then you come crashing down the backside of that wave into those fruit notes. That sure is different. Not in a bad way. Not in a bad way. I think if I were to give that a score per my scale, I think it would land at an 8.1. That's really good. Unique. It's certainly an experience, a memorable sip for sure. Let's move on, shall we? Let's move on to the Bourbon Junkies here in Michigan. And they are blending whiskeys from all over the states to create the Night Stalker series. I think their branding looks really cool. It's very distinct. Almost has kind of like a graffiti vibe to it to me. When we go downtown here, because we live just outside of Grand Rapids, we go downtown on like date nights and stuff. There's a couple key places in the city where there's some really cool graffiti wall art on the sides of some of these buildings and restaurants. Some of them actually hire graffiti artists to come in. They're like, we want you to paint our walls, make them look vibrant, colorful, beautiful. Kind of gives me that same vibe. So this is a blend. They don't put a lot of information on their website, so you kind of have to go digging for it. And if my research is correct, we've got some MGP, Sagamore stuff going on in here in this blend. It comes in at 118 proof. And I will say that their Owen series, these bottles, they tend to be closer to $100. Right? And finding them isn't always an easy thing to do. I know that like Bourbon Outfitter has sold some of their stuff in the past, but it's like it's available when it's available and then it's gone when it's gone kind of a thing. So you probably need to be following Evernorth. Evernorth, by the way, Bourbon Junkies, that's the name of their company, is Evernorth Spirits. So you probably want to follow them on things like Instagram and Facebook to get updates on when bottles are dropping, where and how, and all that stuff. So I do believe the bottle itself says right on there that this is a blend of MGP and Sagamore distillate, which is interesting because Sagamore hasn't been distilling their own juice for super long at this point. Previously, they were just sourcing from MGP. So this is bourbon, by the way. And I gotta say, the nose is giving me some really good like oak sugars. You know, oak that's seasoned really well. Lots of brown sugar here on the nose and a little bit of like an orange zest, like the peel of an orange. You know, and to make a good old fashioned, I usually take an orange peel and express the oils out over the glass. And I get sort of that puff of orange oils. You know what I mean? That's great. A little bit of like a bubbly yum sweetness on the nose too, which I like. And this good tannic dry oak. I like that nose. Let's try it. Cheers. Yeah, I think the oak is really kind of the thing that's standing out to me on this. I don't think they, not to my knowledge, but I don't think they did anything special with their cooperage, so I'm not sure if maybe they just got good barrels or what. But the oak seems really well seasoned, very sweet. You get like those vanillas and brown sugars and a little bit of baking spice. I think a nutmeg comes to mind, like holiday spices. That orange zest is definitely in there pretty early on the palate, but then we start moving into these more kind of tannic and peppery oak vibes that happen after that. A little punch of black peppercorn halfway through the palate. I think one of the things I like about this the most is the mouthfeel is really thick and oily. And so it clings in here and it sticks around for a while afterwards. And so what I'm left with is this long finish that's kind of floral and a little bit zesty. That orange kind of sticks around. But then I think of like even like lavender. We've got these beautiful lavender bushes out front of our home. My wife will sometimes in the summertime, you know, take some of the petals and the leaves off of the lavender bushes. And then you can make, you can get like lavender oil off of them, which is really fun for making. I think lavender syrup is delicious to put in mixed drinks, which is pretty cool. So I get that sweet lavender vibe there late into the finish. It just kind of rides out alongside that orange zest, which is pretty prevalent throughout the entirety of that sip. I actually like that. That's pretty good. I think my only knock against it would be that price point, really, because it is a pretty good sip. I think that this would compete very well against other, you know, bottles on that $60 shelf. I could totally see putting this on my shelf right next to something like a Old Forester 1920 or 1910, because it does give you a lot of those oak notes. I could see it competing directly for my pour of the night. You know, if it was going head to head with something like Four Roses, you know, small batch select, or even like New Riff, like a single barrel of New Riff. I think that's kind of the shelf, you know, tier that I would put this at. The problem with that is if it's closer to $100, that's kind of a knock against it, I think. But it's not that I'm not saying I think that's an unfair price. I totally understand that, especially when you're sourcing and blending, you have to cover your losses. It's a much pricier investment up front because somebody else did the distillation and, you know, the coopering of the work, right? So you have to pay a premium for that work they did just so that you can blend it into your own thing, and then you have to sell it and turn a profit. So I totally understand the price point, but specifically from a consumer position, you may be more inclined to pick up a $60 bottle that can compete with this rather than spending $90 to $100 on this bottle. That being said, I think this is a good bottle of whiskey. So let's give this a score per my scale, all right? So the BJ boys, we're going to give them a score. Oh my gosh. I can't believe I just unironically called them the BJ boys. I don't know if I'll leave that in the video or not. But let's give them a score for the Night Stalker Volume 3. We're going to give this a score of, I'm going to land at 7.9. Yeah, I think that's really good stuff. My only knocks, again, price point, spending $100 for that bottle to get it, delivered to your door or whatever. I mean, that's not a small investment. And on top of that, being MGP and Sagamore, I can tell you guys definitively that maybe it's just me. I have had a lot of MGP and Sagamore distillate over the course of the last couple years. I mean, a lot. Like, we're drowning in MGP and Sagamore stuff these days. Sagamore, great. Like, I love what they're doing. MGP obviously has a great repertoire, great reputation. They've been doing it for a long time now. They know what they're doing. So it's not that it's bad. It's good stuff. But I have had a lot of it, right? That's kind of where I'm at with that. The 7.9, I think, is a very good score nonetheless. Let's move on. The last thing we got here is the new Riff Sherry finish. This is the malted rye, by the way, and I've already had this a couple of times this year. I think it's, well, you've heard my thoughts on it previously in blinds, maybe, if you've watched the channel. It comes in at 111.5 proof. Malted rye, sherry finish. Kentucky straight malted rye, by the way, from New Riff. Good glory. Like, it smells like a freaking Cabernet. They do not go shy on that sherry finish. Very sweet, tangy grape on the nose. It's so fruity. And because it's a malted rye, I'm also getting this sort of a brand cereal note. And I am such an old soul sometimes. Like, I'm just going to keep it real with you guys. I love Raisin Nut Bran. I'm not going to lie. I'm not going to try to sugarcoat it. I think that Raisin Nut Bran is an S-tier cereal. So when I get grape and bran on a nose of something, I'm already digging it. But yeah, definitely brand cereal and tons of grape on the nose of this. And there is also this sort of kind of like a fresh cut grass note in there as well, which is probably due to that rye grain. Let's try it. Cheers. Yeah, it's like strawberries and cream. Very thick and creamy on the palate. Great mouthfeel. There's this bright fruitiness to it. Fruit of the vine. You know, I know it's a sherry finish, but it almost gives me more of like strawberries and cream on the palate, which is just wonderful. It tastes bright and summery, very carefree. It reminds me in a lot of ways of some of the like river root stuff I've had. It carries this like wine cellar funk, which I friggin' adore. I love that damp funkiness. I'm into it. Let me ask you this. Speaking of things that I'm into, I like this shirt. My wife doesn't really love it. Can I get your opinion on this? I think that skulls are kind of cool and they can be classy. So normally I wear like a nice blue vest over this, and I got the skulls on the dress shirt. I think it looks really good. My wife doesn't care for it too much, so she's not home, which is why I'm wearing it right now. But give me a second opinion on the skull shirt, would you? I know Rebel Raid in the comments will weigh in. Rebel's always got good fashion advice for me. Neither here nor there. I mean, come on, guys. New Riff. This is dynamite. It was absolute dynamite, this bottle is. You know, I think one of the cardinal sins of finishing any whiskey is going too easy on it. I know that people want a good balance. They don't want the secondary barrel to override the distillate itself, because obviously you did an initial aging. You want the distillate itself to be able to stand alone on its own 2 feet and really contribute to the palate and the nose. But I think it's a cardinal sin of finishing to finish a whiskey in a secondary barrel and then not be able to tell that it was influenced by a second barrel. You know what I mean? This is not the case here. This has good balance, but man, they did not go shy on that sherry cask, and I'm glad they didn't, because I think with the malted rye specifically, those malted rye notes that you're getting, the brand cereal, this really helps this to come alive, have good balance, and really sing. You know, I actually think you can go either way with this. You could go on the side where you can't tell there was a second barrel, and you can go too far in the other direction, which I think is really easy to do with things like Amburana. I'm not really a big fan of, I know RD1's Amburana barrel got a lot of acclaim and attention last year. I never cared for it. Some of their other stuff I don't think is bad, but their Amburana barrel, it's like, dude, this tastes like, you could say this was 2-year-old bourbon, but it's just all Amburana is all I taste, is just that Brazilian oak, and that's it. And I think it's really easy to do with an oak that is so strong like Amburana is. That's why I think the ones that do it better are things like people like Penelope, and it's like half of that whiskey in that bottle, in the Rio, right there on my shelf. Only half of that is actually Amburana finish. The other, I think, is like a honey cask finish. And then you've got other people like Starlight. I think they did it really well also with a rye instead of a bourbon, so it's not all sweet. You get a little bit of that attitude of that young rye, And you wouldn't want to put like old mellow rye in it, obviously, because it would just get overridden immediately by the Amburana. But they do like a younger, bitier rye with some attitude to it, which plays really well with that sweet Amburana in their cigar blend. So getting the right balance in finishing is a challenge. I don't think it's as easy as people think it is, where it's just like, well, let's just put our whiskey in this other barrel to give it some free flavor. Because you can't, in America, you can't actually flavor the whiskey like you can in Canada. So that's kind of why finishing is as popular as it is, because a lot of times you want to impart this other flavor onto the whiskey, but you can't just put sherry in the whiskey. You can in Canada. If you want to pour sherry into that barrel, you can do it and call it whiskey. In America, you can't do that. It's got to be called like a flavored American spirit of some kind. But you can't call it bourbon. You can't call it rye anymore after you do that. Per the standards of identity, one of the few things President Taft did well. My brother-in-law it's the weirdest thing to be upset about. I never knew this until recently when he was like, I hate President Taft. I'm like, dude, nobody in America thinks about President Taft. He's like, I think about President Taft every day, and I think that man is scum. I'm like, dude. So, as a gag gift for Christmas last year, my wife had had art made of President Taft in a pinup bikini for him. Neither here nor there. This is exceptional. If I'm going to give the Sherry Cask Finish Malted Rye from New Riff a score per my scale, I have to be honest with you guys, I think this is the best bottle I have ever had from New Riff, and I like New Riff. Like, that's high praise. I think this is my favorite thing I've ever had from New Riff. That dank cellar funkiness, I'm into it. This is going to get an 8.6 out of me. 8.6 on my scale. If you haven't tried this yet, you got to try it. It's dynamite. Boom. That's the triple feature. Hope you enjoyed the video. Let me know, of these three, based on my tasting notes alone, which one do you think you would enjoy the most? Pretty high scores all around, but obviously the New Riff Sherry Finish Malted Rye is going to take the gold for me, followed by the Infinite, followed by Evernorth. They're just, listen, getting a 7.9 whiskey on my scale is, I mean, I think that's pretty high praise, especially for people who have not been in the business for very long, right? To be able to even like stand up here next to Barrell's blending prowess, next to New Riff. They're not a legacy distiller, but they've been in the business for a while now, okay? And they know what they're doing. So to even be able to be on the same table and to compete and not be like, oh, that's trash, throw that out next to these other ones, that's a pretty impressive feat. So congratulations to them and what they're doing, and hopefully they only continue to expand their blending prowess and get even better at it. I always cheer for people to win in the whiskey industry, because when whiskey producers win, we win as consumers. So with that, I'm going to take the gold medalist, and we will say cheers, my friends. May you live richly and get better with age, and I hope to catch you in the next one. Big shout out to the people that provided the samples. I'm talking to you guys, Welsh and John and Randy. You guys are rock stars. Appreciate y'all. Hey, bye.